So when I was in college, I took this class, and I think the class title might have been Freedom or something like that. I can't remember exactly at the moment, but it was a political theory class. And in those types of classes, we're basically thinking about power, how power works, from like a philosophical perspective. And all of political theory is basically how we study what's going on with power and politics to try to put forward theories, right? To try to say, just like in the other sciences, like in physics or in chemistry, kind of have like the laws of physics, right? Or the fundamentals. And so in political theory, we're basically trying to understand those things. And one of the structures that we paid attention to for this class, this specific class that I'm talking about, it was like a special topics class that the professor just gets to decide what we're going to do in that class. It's not standardized by any other means. And what he was trying to look at was how there's an opposite to freedom that we actually do want at times. So the American culture, and that's what we were studying, within American culture, what do we think about when we think about freedom? And words are used as symbols. So we will like often use a word, but that has multiple different meanings. And so we think that it becomes obvious to us what we're talking about when we use certain words, even if they have multiple meanings. Based on the context in a sentence, we'll be like, "Oh yeah, I know what he means by freedom." Even though there might be a few different meanings to that same word, we still get confidence because we think we can tell by the context of the sentence or whatever that what he means when he says freedom, right? So what we do in these types of classes and this type of studying is pay attention to the words and what do we actually mean when we say those words. And so not just what does the word symbolize according to the English language, but what does the word mean as it symbolizes something in real life. So what we were looking at was that, yeah, freedom is something that is valued very highly in American culture, but there's something that is like a direct opposite of freedom, or at least puts you in a situation where you have to be either more free or less free. And this other thing that you would choose in sacrifice for freedom, meaning that you would choose to be less free because you want this other thing, is something like love. And that was like crazy for us to go through. But I think the professor, who I liked him as a professor, and I think he was having this idea. I don't know, like if he got put onto this train of thought by somebody else, but he's a great thinker. I imagine he was a young dude too, like for the professors. But I imagine he had a lot of creative thinking in choosing the material that we would study, meaning like he chose like 20 books, bro. We got to read like in the matter of 3 months. But he chooses the curriculum, basically what we're going to be reading and how we're going to study it, the conversations, the discussions, right? Ask questions, get us to answer discussion when we're in class. Exams, how does he set up an examination for us, right? But what we were going through was pretty cool because he was trying to show how freedom is on one side and love is on the other side. And so the more and more freedom you'll want, the less you can have of these other things that are like love. And how do you get there, right? What was the logic? By the way, happy Valentine's Day. You're probably watching way after Valentine's Day, but today's Valentine's Day, and my mind has been on love. And so that's why I'm talking about this today, because what I would learn from this class and this train of thought that the professor had, that he based his class around, that he then passed on to me, is a train of thought that would help me think about the meaning of life. Yes, the meaning of life. And so let me explain what I was learning from this class, and then I will tell you about what that helped me realize about the meaning to life. Right? Another quick tangent is, did college teach me anything, right? Was it worth it? Brother, when you're a student, it's like everything you do is worth it for learning. Like if you're a student, if you're a real student, all your experiences are for learning. If you're an optimist, then there's always a good opportunity on the other side. If you're the person who's ready to seize the opportunity, and yeah, it's always worth it. So anyways, when I was in class, I learned these things that were about the topics, but the certain type of thinking that I would do in these types of classes is what made it so much worth it, right? And I would go on to think about these things. For example, in this class, we're talking about how freedom is similar to these other concepts. And so we grouped them together. We made like a family of concepts that kind of all fell under freedom. And then on the other side, we had a family of concepts that seemed to be the opposite seemed to be the opposite of freedom, right? But on that side, it was like all kind of could be connected to love. And the professor was going to say that he's thinking that on that side of things, in that family of love, all of those things are for love, and we just might not really see it that way all the time. But all these different concepts, unseemingly connected to love, are actually for love. So on the side of freedom, right, in those family concepts, it was like things like independence, it was things like autonomy and sovereignty, it was things like liberty, another word which is like kind of like freedom but means something different. And there was independence is an important one, right? Let me go back to that real quick. So the idea of independence as like freedom, and those things being closely connected, and you see that like in the American culture, or like in the American history, how it plays out that it becomes super important to become independent from Great Britain, right? So going for our independence from, as in like one country from another country, but also like freedom for people, meaning like us who are Americans should have freedom, and that being written in our Constitution. So it's like those things are closely connected for American culture, but also like they're kind of closely connected when you start thinking about like finances and like economic situations on a very micro level, thinking of communities, even thinking of the family units and households. And you think about how like let's just say like a child growing up in their parents' house eventually seeks their own independence, right? Maybe the motivation is the freedom, right? Or maybe there's an inherent value for independence there, where the child's like just wants to be an independent type of person. Maybe they've always been that child, and now that they're teenagers, they're really thinking, I need to become this as an adult, and they prepare themselves, and early in their adulthood they seek financial independence, complete financial independence, and like they move out of their parents' house, right? Maybe it starts slower. They work, they have money, pay some bills, and then eventually like they move out of their parents' house and they feel okay, completely financially independent. Maybe they had the inherent value for independence, but nonetheless we see how that is also a process of gaining more and more freedom, if you will. But we were talking about these kinds of ideas, there's all these different concepts that are related to freedom, but there's some type of value that humans seem to have for freedom, right? Before I get into the other side, I want to quickly make note of something else about freedom, which is that we broke down that there's different types of freedom. We would say that there's liberty and there's autonomy. And what was so important in politics, in history, and still now, is the idea of liberty, meaning that an outside force shouldn't be coming and getting in my way. And so there's a certain type of freedom called liberty, which is how much am I able to move without something outside of me, constraint. So it's like liberty is freedom from external constraints, and then autonomy is freedom from internal constraints. So autonomy would be the idea that I can I can go and do things. I think a lot of people would think about like autonomy in a sense as like if you do something to stop me, you're taking away my autonomy. But my autonomy comes from how I make decisions, not how somebody else affects the circumstances very important to my decision making. So, for example, like how I behave towards another person may be like, so let's say I got to decide how I behave towards another person. Though there's a few important factors, right? My mood that day. What is my mood that day? That's an important factor to determine how if I'm not feeling that good, my decisions are more easily to behave not so optimistic, not so positive with them. But no, another important factor is how they're behaving, right? So how they're behaving is a factor in my decision making about how I'm going to respond to them. Okay, so my autonomy is always about my decision making, but how another person is behaving doesn't necessarily take away my autonomy. The way that the connection between me having less autonomy happens when someone else's behavior is kind of impeding a little bit, right? Is something a little more complex because someone else's behavior can only take away liberty from me, but it cannot take away autonomy. What I do within myself is what takes away autonomy. If my decision making based on somebody else's behavior tells me to lose autonomy, then that's what happens. But if my decision making is to never lose autonomy, then I always retain that. So this is an idea of freedom, and it's so tricky, but this is what happens to all of us. It's like being conditioned in society. So whenever you feel like, oh well, society has made it this way, and society this, and when you have those awakenings, society does things to take away your liberty, meaning like there's external constraints stopping you, literally stopping you, like physically from certain things, like maybe there's a person who will fit like cops or something, but or there's ways that society sets up conditions that make you change the way you behave, and the way they make you do it is by like defeating you psychologically. What does that exactly mean? Like you're just getting like kind of like mind fucked, and you don't even know what's happening. Most of the time you don't know what's happening because you wouldn't let it happen if you realized it was happening. But you get mind fucked, and so basically you're being told, hey, here's limits, and you can't go beyond those limits, but you don't go and test it, and instead you just live within those limits. But if you were to go test it, you'll find, oh, actually those are not limits after all. Why would you want me to believe that those are limits if they're not limits after all? And they weren't keeping you, no, they weren't never there keeping you from testing the limits, or maybe they were trying to stop you, but they weren't even there holding a limit at all. They were just making you think there was a limit so that you wouldn't go, and you decided not to go. And that's what society will be doing. And I had to explain that first because we're gonna find out why we fall for this stuff, why society is important, and yet it can fuck us up. On the other side of freedom is a family of concepts that are related to love, and it was a bunch of different things like collective. The idea of collective is on the other side. Wow. Commitment. Wow. On the other side, some of the things that were opposite of like freedom, were like constraints, restraints, limits, there was a lot of other things that we were saying, but the way that the professor was guiding us, it helped us narrow down to what we were talking about when we thought of the opposite to freedom. So I'm gonna cut to the chase and do the quick version, right? Which is saying that the reason the no, hold on, let me back up. Before I tell you the reason why you give up freedom, the opposite of the freedom is some type of limit on what you can do. So some type of limit on what you can do is the opposite of freedom. So anything that could fit that description could be like the opposite of freedom. And what you're looking for is one idea that encompasses all things that could be the opposite of freedom. But when you start to think about what could be the opposite of freedom, and you think about the description, has to make sense. There's like, okay, the limit on what you can do. What's a limit on what you can do? You think about all these different examples of limits. And then these things start to seem like very different things. Like, how could different things be the opposite of one thing? Are those things all the same thing then? And you don't see that. Like, the opposite of freedom in one sense might be a law. A law limits what you can do. And then the other thing is like a law enforcer. Another opposite of freedom is like a limiting belief, something that you believe that's limiting you, right? The opposites of freedom, I think one person was saying something like injustice. And so there was a whole connection. In their mind, it was immediate connection that went from freedom to injustice. But when we started to explore what they meant, we saw, no, there's this whole web of concepts that they're thinking about that makes a connection between injustice and freedom. Sorry, I can't remember exactly what all the different words we came up with, but the whole idea is that the opposite of freedom is connected to love, because the only thing you will have when you don't have freedom is your existence without free will. Okay. And it was crazy. I'm just reflecting and thinking about this whole thing because I took another class with the same guy where we talked about free will and is free will real? Does it even exist? But the point here was that on the other side of freedom is an absence of free will. Now, when you have an absence of free will, how do things happen? Like, you are not real, you're not a real person, right? You are a real person. But the way that things are happening, you can't understand self-interest. Nothing you do is because of you. Everything you do is because of something else besides you, something else, either greater than you, right? When you get spiritual, then you can start thinking about all those stuff. Or you think of yourself as just a part of a chain reaction in life. And so the people around you are who have the influence on you. If on one side we have independence connected to freedom, and the opposite of independence is dependence, right? This is the idea. Dependence. Like, can you be independently living and acting, doing things independently? The opposite of that would be dependence. And so something of not having freedom is like something of being dependent. And so everything you do and everything you experience in life is dependent on other things. And it's wordplay when you just think about the words, but when you try to really visualize in real life what the things we're talking about, and it might take you a little while. Like, it's better to sit with it. Sometimes you never know the right frequency. You might just be picking this up and understanding exactly what I'm saying. If not, it might take you a little bit, but it's worth it to pick this one. This is a super big gem. Maybe let me give the 30-second version now, and maybe we can clip that. But the opposite of freedom is actually commitment. If we're talking about autonomy, right? In the opposite of freedom can be a codependent relationship, like if we're talking about liberty. What's super important to me was how we came up with this definition of love in that class, and it was doing things for others without regard for a benefit to yourself. And that's super important to understand, because freedom is this value to do things as you choose to do things. And then love is doing things for others without regard for benefit to yourself. So on one end, when we're thinking about love, it's like doing things for other people is a motivation to do things. When you think about freedom, it's how you choose to do things. And what that got me thinking about was that everything in life is either I'm choosing to do it because it's for me, or I'm choosing to do it because it's for others. But I always value freedom, and I always value the idea that I choose to do things how I choose to do things. Freedom, super important, right? And so everything in life is for some more happiness, or for some love, for self-interestly motivated or motivated by love, right? So I would think really what I'm trying to figure out in life is, how do I design my life in a way where I can have everything I do be for both love and happiness. I do things for others, and that makes me happy. I do it without regard for benefit to myself, but as I'm doing it, I'm happy. And that was like a huge unlock for me. And I felt like it was almost like a message from God. And then I felt like I needed to share it. So I put it like I started making a little bit of content on it. My brother helped me make some audios on that whole thing, and I think some of them are on this YouTube channel. You can scope it out. But love and happiness, that's what I would talk about. Happy Valentine's Day. I got into the whole power thing back when I was in college, and I studied power, and I took that one class. We were looking at the idea of freedom, and a family of concepts related to love was like the opposite of freedom, and it blew my mind. And I realized I can't control a lot of things bigger than me that are out there. I should only focus on what I can control, right? Wasn't like genius and came up, but I heard people say it, but I found how it was so relevant in my life. And I really just stepped up for myself and said, hey, focus on what you can control and don't focus on what you cannot control. All the energy you can put into what you can control will just make your life better despite what's happening outside of you. So whatever's going on with liberty in my community, in my country, is things that I may have a small influence on, but I can't really control. But I can control a whole lot about what I'm doing, right? And I can have more and more control. I can have more and more autonomy by getting better self-control. Think about that. Some of my autonomy, like some of my freedom, is missing because I can't control myself. So I can't choose to do what I really want to do if I can't. I really want to get up at 5 a.m. every morning, but I can't seem to get myself to do it. So I'm lacking some type of freedom. That type of freedom that I'm lacking is called autonomy. So what we have to do is figure out what is limiting us on the inside, and we unlock some more autonomy and we experience more freedom. And that freedom you're looking for is beautiful, and you don't even need to look at who's stopping you. Knowing that you could be stopping yourself, you always have control over somebody who is stopping you, and it is yourself. But you might not have control over somebody else who's stopping you. But what's so cool is with a lot of self-awareness, you're able to figure out how to get more and more autonomy by just working on yourself. And then when you do that, you become more powerful, okay? And that's why power matters, because then when you're powerful, you can take that power and address the outside forces that are taking away liberty, right? Liberty, the type of freedom that has to do with external constraints. And there's a difference between the external constraints and the internal restraints. I restrain from doing such and such. Why would I do such a thing? And the answer was in the class that I took, where we said, what was the opposite of freedom? And all these things that are like freedom, what are the opposite of those things? And we found commitment. Commitment is a motivation for you to limit your freedom. Wow. So not only is it like a motivation to do something, but it's a motivation to say, to go and decide, I'm going to not control as much in some form, right? I'm going to, for the sake of being committed to such and such, I will limit what I can do with such and such. Commitment. Like, and on Valentine's Day, we've got to think about it, right? And there's different types of love. So when I went into Love and Happiness, dove deep into the whole idea that everything we do is for love and happiness, and the best life is where everything we do is for both at the same time. So I dove deep into that and realized, hey, there's different types of love. There's romantic love, there's like friendship love, there's family love, right? There's love for like objects. It's a certain type of love. It's not what we mean when we're talking about relationships, but type of love for objects or experiences, right? Activities like hobbies and stuff. I love playing a certain game. Okay, so different types of love, okay? But when you think about so think about, like, let's say romantic love, and you think about monogamous relationships, you go official with somebody and you're exclusive. And what that means is you committed to monogamous relationship, being exclusive. And so since you're committed to that, you accept the limit on your freedom, on what you can do. You're not free to just go and flirt with anybody. So commitment is the opposite to freedom in that sense, right? And what I'm just talking about is autonomy. Is that you will choose to put limits on your own autonomy. You will choose to limit your own freedom. Yeah, you do limit. You value freedom, but you choose to limit it too, because you want to be committed to something else. And like another example is like you have friendship love. Like you got friends, right? And to be a good friend, like you have to have some loyalty. You have to be able to have some commitment. Like in a sense, like if you and your friend make plans to meet up somewhere, like you're expected to keep your plans, right? If you have a friend who flakes, then you see kind of like a trust issue there. You maybe like feel like a little trust issue, right? Especially if it's a situation where they just like no show, completely flake on you, don't say anything about it. Then there's a little bit of a trust problem there. And when there's a trust problem, there's not going to be a strong friendship. So when you think about friendships, like you have to have the commitment to certain things, like commitment to showing up to that place, or commitment to certain communication. Like if you're the type of friend who just doesn't take the time to catch up or spend time, then you're not going to have strong friendships. So if you don't have commitments to certain things in your relationships, like friendships even, then you you know you're gonna be missing some love, is the point, right? And so what I'm saying is, love is also important in our lives. I think sometimes people, if you would think about it like a spectrum of people being more self-interested or more like altruistic, some people are like leaning one way or the other, right? People are more self-interested and thinking about themselves, so they're going to be focused on achieving more and more happiness in their life, and what's going to be important to them probably is seeking more and more freedom, and they're not going to think so much about how making commitments for love in their life is going to be helpful or productive or like worth it, right? They're not even going to think about it being worth limits on their freedom. And someone who's the opposite is going to think different. Like somebody who's not self-interested, who's really altruistic, really just wants to do things for other people and doesn't think about doing great things for themselves that way. They could be a strong person, but be careful who you're picturing in your head. They could be a strong person. They can have a great life. They can have a lot of great things going for them, but they just lean far on the other side of altruism, and they're thinking, yeah, I'm supposed to serve others and do mostly things for other people. These people will think about love a whole lot in their life, right? Like it's going to be a huge focus for them. And then I think for them, it's easy to understand how commitment is important. So these people will tend to be like the loyal type of friends. They'll be like the people who, their word, what they say really, really matters. They don't just say whatever. Like words carry weight, more and more weight, because sometimes all you have when you make a commitment and you want someone else to believe it, that you're making that you're committed, or you want someone to really see that, sometimes all you have is words at first until your behavior can show it. And because of that, people who are leaning on the altruistic side, the words really matter. They do matter. And so when you live like that, your words carry more and more weight. You hold more value to communication by words. So they are not necessarily going to be thinking like, okay, how can I have more freedom? Like they're not going to be thinking that. And so what's crazy is me, I think about having more and more freedom, like financial freedom and time freedom, and start thinking about like these things and how the government infringes on our freedom. And like freedom matters to me. And I used to think, it's like an American culture thing that we focus on that. And I was also ambitious in college, already understanding that I wanted to win for myself, and I was prepared for a competitive world, and very willing and to go into the capitalist society where money's like huge focus. I was like excited to learn about the business world, and I don't think it was surprising to me that I was leaning more self-interested when I thought of how I'm much more focused on freedom, stuff like that. But I also felt like I was altruistic in a sense. So I didn't feel like I was too far one way to the other, but at the time leaning towards self-interest and wanting freedom and independence, and not thinking about looking for so much love. But what would become very important was that I would reflect, like after when I moved away to college, I moved away from all my family, get away from everything I ever known. And so having to like start new, like making new friends and understand what love is from a day-to-day basis without any of my people that I previously known. Just strangers. Only people I can accept into my life now. So I realized like the privilege that I had to have a lot of love growing up. Had a lot of love back home, not like in my household, and then just extended family, greater community. I just experienced love. That's a huge privilege because then I didn't have something calling for me to focus on love, and had the privilege to be a little more self-interested, I would say. So when I realized that, then it allowed me to always tune into the balancing act. There was a balancing act going on to where, yeah, being self-interested is good, and of course, there's an inherent value for freedom, and independence is good, and it's important that I do feel good about my life and feel happy, like all those things. But don't ever forget about love, and don't ever forget how important commitment is, and don't, forget that the type of freedom I want most is autonomy, and I will make commitments and give up some autonomy for the sake of love. But I will also seek more power so that I can fight off liberties. And so, one last quick tangent to end this whole thing. A lot going on in our country and in the world, but what can I really do about the greater forces? Not too much. I can give a contribution to the wave, but it's not going to be that satisfying. So I don't know how much it's worth it for me to talk about politics, to go out and protest, to try to become a part of the whole political game and make moves that way. I don't know if it's worth it for me, and I don't want to really do the calculations to know if it's worth it for me, because when I was in college, my calculations said it was not worth it. My contributions just don't have enough impact that will be satisfying for me. And it don't feel too much like love, because lots of things can be expressions of love. That doesn't feel any more special of an expression of love. So then I thought, okay, I got to get more power if I really want to do something about liberty. But as I was seeking power, I was going too far self-interested, and I lost sight of doing things for love. And so then what I thought was like, wow, like what's the real important thing here? And I remind myself it's a balancing act, right? It's a balancing act. And as I go to seek more power, I will have to be a little more self-interested, independent, right? Seek freedom, right? But don't forget, do things for love. I'm a family man now. Got a lot of love. It's huge motivation in my life. But the things that drove me to fight for a bigger cause, that didn't stop calling me. It didn't stop pulling me. So as I figure out how to live life with all the love I have right now, I'm still balancing that. Still balancing that. I need more autonomy. And I left my employer to seek some more time freedom. Really, because I left one employer, right, to get into a new career where I can have a better future. A future with more income, higher income potential, a career that gives me the future of more time freedom. For sure, huge autonomy when I left one job that had me on call 24 hours for 6 days straight. And one time it was just 24 hours, 7, every single day on call. But leaving that and being in a place where I can make my schedule, it's a huge boost in autonomy. And I'm just being honest here, transparent, that the huge motivation in my life to do that and take a risk. Being a family man, I got to provide for my family, but making that move that I made and saying, I'm going to like kind of start over a little bit, not completely, but it kind of feels that way. You go into a job, you get really good at it, make really good money, but then you leave and then you kind of start fresh. You don't know exactly what you're doing. So anyways, it did take a pay cut too. It's totally fine though, because in the grand scheme of things, money is just a tool to help me get other things that I actually want in my life. And I have a lot of things that I've wanted in life. Like when I was in my 20s, I aspired to become a family man. I aspired to have certain things or whatever. Professionally, aspired to be somewhere, and now I'm like in a position where I became what I wanted to become, and then I'm looking forward again and being like, what's the future, and what do I have to do now to prepare? What do I have to become for the future? Who is that? Who am I? Who's that future version of me? I'm gonna need some more autonomy. I'm gonna need some more autonomy. It's a bigger fight that I need more power for. And I'm going to need some more autonomy so I can go and amass some more power.